Hi everyone, Amy Lansky here, and welcome to What's Going On, the show where I discuss what's been on my mind lately, exploring anything from current events to alternative medicine to the mysteries of consciousness. Today is May 12th, 2017, and I'll be sharing with you a recent article from my Active Consciousness newsletter entitled, Are Competitive Sports Actually a Good Thing? First, let me confess, I'm not a competitive sports person. In fact, no one in my nuclear family is. If any of us were to watch the Super Bowl or even know who was playing in it, it would probably be me. And when I do watch it, I can get pretty worked up. In fact, I try to use my intentionality tricks from active consciousness to help my side win. But in general, I don't really care much for these kinds of sports, nor have I ever played them. I'm a solo sports kind of person. Swimming and canoeing are my favorites. And playing on a team has always been an uncomfortable experience for me. Truthfully, I've always assumed that my feelings about competitive sports were not only antisocial in some way, but even a sign of weakness. But a recent episode, or at least an episode I recently watched, of the early 90s TV show Northern Exposure got me to thinking otherwise. By the way, if you've never watched this amazing show, or even if you have, I really recommend getting into it. It was one of the first shows, or perhaps the first show, that featured excellent, sophisticated writing and amazing character development. Set in a small town in Alaska, Northern Exposure seems pretty unusual in today's TV landscape. It's an hour-long show, but it dabbles in magical realism, comedy, spiritual themes, especially Native American spiritual wisdom, emotional depth, romantic tension, and often pretty profound explorations into life's deep questions. And it's a great show to watch before going to bed. No fear and angst like so many of shows today, even comedies are that way. Really, I can't recommend it enough. Each show makes you really think. So anyway, what I recently watched was an episode called Birds of a Feather. As is often the case, several parallel storylines in the episode explore the same theme. In one of these threads, a character named Holling confesses that he loathes baseball and all team sports for that matter. But the irony is that Holling is probably the most manly man on the show. He owns and runs the town bar and restaurant. And in fact, he's an accomplished hunter and even the kind of guy who, in one episode, every few years he finds this deep need that he has to hook himself up to a plow and plow a field. So this guy is strong, but not only that, he is in his 60s and married to the hottest girl in town who's around 20. Now, that might sound a little creepy, but it's not at all. He is just that virile. But Holling is also a thinking man, and he has been enduring his customers always watching the games on the TV in the bar. But finally, he can't stand it any longer. When the secret comes out, and he tells them that he hates baseball, he becomes the butt of jokes all around town. In fact, his young wife Shelley is pretty dismayed at this revelation as well. He says to her one night, "For people to judge a man's worth and his very manhood according to the way he feels about sport, and not to recognize it for the piddling, inconsequential goings-on that it really is. What is it really? It's nothing, right? It's just a game." Well, Shelley wasn't totally convinced, but I was amazed that he came out and said this to her. Later in the show, though, he wins a bar pool on a baseball game, and all the men there are teasing him mercilessly about this. And in response, Holling gets pretty angry, turns off the TV, and he decides to give all his winnings to another man at the bar whose life totally revolves around baseball. And this is what he says to him. Aren't you the man who watches all these grown men chase little balls around all the time? Half of your life is spent doing that. You people, you think a man's a man because he wears the team colors and guzzles beer in front of the tube? Can't you see, boys? The sands of time are dribbling through the hourglass. Don't you ever thirst for a little discourse? Hunger for a little knowledge? I really found myself wowed by this exchange. In today's world, perhaps especially in the United States, people become more obsessed than ever with sports. The money is huge. In fact, parents these days seem to care more about their children's sports teams than about their activities and their schoolwork. In fact, many teenagers are sleep deprived because they are overprogrammed with all these demands. My sons were A students at one of the most challenging schools in the country, but they had lots of free time after finishing their homework because they didn't spend hours before or after school in sports. And this was at a school that has become notorious nationwide for a recent spate of suicides by stressed out, depressed teenagers. I understand that competitive sports are supposedly engender teamwork and are good for physical fitness, but let's think more deeply about that. We can become physically fit by exercising our bodies in a million other ways. And our school sports team really so wonderful? I mean, in my experience, they're often just another opportunity for competition, anger, stress, and shaming, not to mention injuries that can last a lifetime. And what's all this hype about professional sports really all about? People get so worked up at a game that they sometimes commit acts of violence against those supporting the opposite team. You might argue that humans are naturally violent and it's better to channel this aggression into sports than onto the battlefield. But is this really true? And do we really need to foster idolization of today's modern gladiators who sometimes ultimately suffer the same fate as their predecessors from Roman times, dying from sports-related concussions and other illnesses and injuries? Truthfully, I'm not really sure about the answers to these questions, but I am sure that the competitive sports phenomenon has only become more intense in my lifetime. Why can't we channel our energy, and especially our children's energies, into other challenges like fighting for and tending the earth, working to protect the lives of fellow citizens, or solving our world's many other problems? Such efforts also require teamwork and often foster physical fitness too. Why is it more socially acceptable or even required to fritter our life away watching others play a game on TV rather than getting out and doing something constructive for the world ourselves? Indeed, I think spending some time each day simply meditating, and especially teaching our children how to meditate, would be much more constructive. Something to think about.